All right, well, welcome back for another episode of the Untamed Life. Today, I'm really excited about today's episode. I have a special guest on. I'm here with Ronnie Landis. Ronnie is an amazing holistic health and performance coach, transformational leader. He is the author of Addiction Free Lifestyle, which is an amazing book, The True Path to Inner Peace and Self Mastery. And we're going to be unpacking a lot of that conversation. Um, Ronnie went from being an Olympic hopeful athlete, enduring two knee surgeries, to becoming a professional nutritionist, to then becoming a motivational health speaker, multiple authors, entrepreneur, and coach. I know you are super devoted to the transformational journey, the rebirthing
Hmm.
process, not only for yourself, but of humanity. So today, Ronnie is standing on the shoulders of giants who have gone before him, before us, after 12 years of being a professional health and transformational leader. And he's entering into the next evolution and cycle of your rebirth. I've been watching and observing, and I think a lot of us are kind of going through these massive
Hmm. Hmm.
contractions and feeling the, rebirthing the canal and everything like
Yeah.
that. So I'm excited to have you on the show. Thank you again for being here. I think it's going to be a really powerful conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
So good. So I want to just kind of dive right into this topic of addiction. Tomorrow I'm actually
Hmm.
starting Ronnie's dopamine reset protocol, you guys, and I'm doing it because I'm just at a space where I want to be so clear and so clean and do that
Hmm.
reset and reboot. And I think when people hear that word, even just addict or addiction free, it's like,
Hmm.
oh, well, I'm not an addict, or I am, or people are hiding from that. So let's just start. Let's kind of open the conversation around like, what's an addict, anyways? What makes one an addict?
Hmm. Well, I don't label people addicts.
Good.
I don't think that's helpful.
I don't. Okay.
So
Good.
let's
Good.
just
Good.
get that out of the way. I think that we all have potentially addictive tendencies. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. One thing that's helpful to understand is what makes something technically addictive is two things: how much dopamine it produces in the brain, and then how easily accessible it is. So that's number one. So the things that we get quote unquote addicted to, that's just one dimension of the conversation. And then the person themselves, the human being themselves, is another part of the conversation. And we have to be able to separate those two things, because in the addiction world, there's just a lot of convoluted concepts and ideas that really are not helpful and don't support people in their healing and recovery process ultimately. A lot of what's out there is just kind of yo-yo type of approaches that don't factor in the whole human being
Mm-hmm.
and cause people to swing from addiction to recovery, back to addiction, and then back to recovery and back to addiction. Or they're trading out one thing for another, but they never fully heal what's really going on with them. And so the external mechanisms, whatever it may be the substances, the food, the sugar, the alcohol, the cigarettes, the cannabis, the drugs, the substances, the social media, the digital devices, the gambling, the pornography, whatever is out there outside of us that we get habituated to and develop addictive tendencies. Those are really just coping strategies that we're using in order to numb, tranquilize, sedate some part of us that is disconnected. So it's an internal disconnect within the human being itself, otherwise known as a lack of integration between the
Mm-hmm.
mind, the body, and the heart or the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fundamentally what has to be dealt with. So you have one level of it, which is the neurobiological side of it, the dopaminergic system of the brain, and how it gets wired for outside stimulation based on the pleasure and reward systems of the brain. So that's one level of it when we're looking at just like the
Yep.
biology of
Yep.
addiction. And that's important to understand. And then the deeper root of it is the psycho spiritual aspect of it, which is that's when we get into really factoring in the human being and in the trauma that somebody has dealt with or is unresolved within them, that they're using these coping strategies as a way to unconsciously numb the inner angst, the tension, the anxiety, the stress that they're dealing with, and they either don't know how else to deal with it, they don't have a better strategy, or they simply are unconscious to it. And that's basically what we're dealing with in society. We have
Yeah.
multiple industries based on tranquilizing trauma, and you could call it sleep problems, sleep apnea. We have a Xanax for that, or anxiety. If you have depression, you have overactivity, um, restless leg syndrome. I mean, there's a million different things that have been labeled, and even many things made up, like ADHD, ADD, attention deficit disorder, all that kind of thing. Not to say that those aren't real phenomenon, but they've been turned into an industry to sell you pills or some sort of magic potion that is going to ultimately just help you numb even further, to get you to forget about the symptoms. And the symptoms are, of course, just a downstream effect of sensation that's arising in the body to let you know that there's a deeper issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I love, oh my gosh, you said so many things like that right there. And I love that you started with that. And I asked that first question the way I did on purpose of who is an addict, because it's
Hmm.
one of the things that I fight back a lot with clients that I work here that they've gone through traditional programs. Like they're constantly saying to themselves, I am an alcoholic, I am
Hmm.
an alcoholic, or
Hmm.
whatever the thing is. And I'm just like, you're so working again. I believe that that's so working against the work of being healed. It's like, get up and walk, pick up your mat, let's
Hmm.
go, you're done. Yes, there's a time to have that awareness. So I love that. I want to go back to that, even that first piece of why
Hmm.
that's so detrimental, and to realize that I am not the thing. I am not my body, even. These are just
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
that are addictive and I've been engaged in and have a relationship with and stuff. So let's go back to that for a second. Can you unpack that more and why you actually believe that, and I know it's part of your core teaching too, is we have to break that narrative that I am, that attachment, and why that's so essential. Because I know that is integral to a lot of the
Sure.
core programs that are out there. And I think
Hmm. Hmm.
probably well intended, but really creating a lot more damage, in my opinion. And I'm
Yeah.
curious to know yours.
Yeah. I mean, they could do the entire podcast just on that, probably.
I know, I know.
I mean, it's really the thing is, we develop psychological identifications to the things that we habituate in our lives, the things outside of us that we habituate towards. So, for example, I was a nutritionist, I still am, but I've been a nutritionist for about 12 years, and I was in multiple different like dietary communities. So,
Yeah.
like the vegan, vegetarian, raw food community, the paleo community, the keto community, all these different dietary identities that communities of people gather around under kind of this theme or this identification towards a particular diet camp, right? And so that's where I started to really see the psychological aspect of diet. But then I started to realize this is actually going on everywhere.
Yeah.
So then you have it in the fitness industry, like the CrossFit world, and the different, like the triathlon communities, and all these different things that people will latch on an identity to, or they'll take on and adopt an identity, ultimately because they don't know who they are.
Exactly.
And this is where the problem is, and this is why I've never really got too stuck in any one particular community, and I've crossed many communities, because I always had a sense of who I was, and I
Mm.
was interested in the nutritional side of things, or the fitness side of things, or whatever the things that I was into, the biohacking community. People get really, when they find something that works, and they find something that really lights them up, and there's a community of people around it, most people will tend to acquiesce or cohere to the group dynamic, and we
Mm-hmm.
call this collectivism, right? So
Mm-hmm.
people will adhere to the collective paradigm or theme, which is something that we've been seeing in the world the last couple of years, this collectivism idea. And then Ultimately, it's because people are scared and they don't know who they are, and so they just acquiesce to whatever the current paradigm is.
Yeah.
And so this is happening. To answer your question, this is first of all, this is happening in every major type of community. It doesn't really matter what it is. And I saw this happening in the nutrition world, and so I started studying the psychology of all this to understand like what really is going on with people. Why do people follow so easily, and they don't question anything? And then what ends up happening is that if an opposing idea comes in, then they will be triggered or feel defensive, or they need to protect their position, when that's not really necessary. That's not the case. It's not black or white or this versus that. It's just there's multiple perspectives to everything. There's a spectrum of ideas in the human experience, and we can't get too attached to one thing. And so um tracing back to your question, actually, if you could just like rephrase that, because I kind of like, I want to circle back to the addiction thing,
Yeah.
but if you could just, if you not rephrase it but just pose the question one more time for me.
Why do you, well, the original thing was we said we don't put labels on people,
Oh,
right?
that's right, yeah.
Like this idea of like I'm an addict or I am an alcoholic or I'm a
Hmm.
vegan or I'm a whatever,
Yeah.
I'm a top 1% entrepreneur. We see this in the
Hmm. Hmm.
entrepreneurial space like crazy,
Right.
right? I identify as, how that can actually be so limiting
Yeah.
into our healing and moving forward. Like, why
Okay.
is that even a
Yeah.
dangerous thing, right?
Yeah,
Mm.
perfect. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So all that to make the point. So with addiction, because what's interesting is that when you go through all these communities, you will find that the energetic of addiction is rooted in this identification phenomenon.
Yeah.
So why people get so intensely focused on different activities, let's just call it, is because of an addiction in of itself. And it's,
Mm.
but it's a deeper addiction. It's a psychological type of addiction that masks itself under the guise of a fitness routine
Right.
or a dietary approach. So like in the fitness world, it might be like, what would the addiction be? It would be like workaholism, addiction to fitness, addiction to working out, the adrenaline rush, like,
The next race, the
yeah,
next time, the
aesthetics,
fast food
like,
time. Mm-hmm.
like all that. And then in the food world, well, that's pretty obvious. What would that be? Some sort of food eating disorder. I saw that a lot in the raw vegan world, and there's a technical term called anorexia, or no, orthorexia.
Orthorexia, yeah.
Orthorexia, which you guys can go look that up. I talked about it quite a bit over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And anorexia, orthorexia, all these food disorders are very common when people are so deep in the food diet world, and you get obsessed with what you're eating and what you're not eating, right? And your whole worldview gets kind of wrapped around that. The entrepreneur world, that's pretty easy. Workaholism.
Mm-hmm.
And then what comes along with that? There's the coffee, the stimulants,
Mm-hmm.
the Xanax at night, like the sex addiction to like to release the pressure, or whatever the things are. Like I just saw it so much, like closet eating in the food world, binge
Mm-hmm.
eating behind the scenes, because people are
Mm-hmm.
cleansing and detoxing all the time, and they're calorie restricting all the time. So no one, when no one's looking, they're like, the vegans are going and eating meat and fish.
It's like I'm really deprived over here, and I'm
Yeah.
standing here with a badge of honor because I'm so entrenched in this identity. And meanwhile, I'm going in the closet full of shame,
Yes.
feeling like, there's something wrong with me. I don't have the strength. I don't, there's something wrong. And so I want to kind of transition into that because I think they're tied
Yeah,
hand in
I
hand
think
too.
that's great. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
perfect
this
transition.
this idea that we get so entrenched in this identity, and I think either you see the people who get so fixed in it, and I can relate to everything you're saying because I remember people coming into
Mm-hmm.
I used to own a
Mm-hmm.
holistic wellness facility too, and I remember people coming in with binders like 4 inches thick of every calorie they'd counted up, and I was like,
Oh my
okay,
God.
we have like every single micronutrient calorie, and I was like, okay, we have issues. Parents that were posting their kids' weights on the fridge, and like so
Mm.
many dysfunctional
Mm.
things, but rooted in this attachment to identities, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
really being
Mm-hmm.
able, I love that question, is do you know who you are at a soul level? Have you done the
Mm.
work to go into
Mm-hmm.
that discovery? But and I want to kind of tie in the shame and the hiding thing, because this closet eating, this closet, sex addiction, closet
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
affairs going on that are, I work with a lot of men too, and that are just in these
Mm-hmm.
kind of like
Mm-hmm.
addictive affair cycles. And um, I was just working on the book in my book, and I was writing about my dad's sex addiction and how like that was so hard to live with as a female, and how much work I had to do to overcome just that
Mm-hmm.
dysfunctional relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about shame for a minute, because
Mm-hmm.
what are we really hiding from? And, how is this shame really perpetuating this sickness, not only in this person, but in these family units and on the planet? I know that's a big
Right.
question I just asked you, but I want to go into this. What are we really hiding from?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're hiding from ourselves. We're playing peekaboo with reality, and yeah, I mean, you could say that we're hiding from God. We're hiding, and like you could take it back to the original, the quote
Yeah.
unquote original sin, and the that whether you believe that's true or not, that's just an allegory. It's kind of that same kind of principle, like when shame manifested itself and how we all have this like propensity to hide from the divine, from
Mm-hmm.
the all-seeing light, or however you want to phrase that. Like yeah, we all have on some level. I mean, that's, well, I should say, when those of us who deal with addiction, or have or do deal with addiction, that's ultimately what it is. We're hiding from the mirror. We're hiding from the reflection in the mirror, and we're hiding from just taking accountability and ownership of our experience. And it's an interesting vicious cycle, because on one level, somebody knows what's going on one
Mm-hmm.
level. There's like a higher awareness that we know what we're doing, so we could be living dual lives,
Yes.
right? Like we could be very conscious and aware and doing a lot of very healthy things, and trying to make progress in our life. And then there can be another version of us, which would be the shadow, which is the opposite of that, and drags us down and does things that are counterproductive to the progress that we're trying to make in our life. So it's like, and then that creates this internal conflict, and that also creates an identity conflict. So then that brings in the identity thing again, because then if we are in conflict with our own identity, and we're going back and forth on the seesaw, and we're stuck in the throes of addiction, even when we know consciously what's going on, then we're not only are we're going to experience bouts of shame, but we're not going to know how to address it, because we're going to continue to chip away at our confidence and our self-esteem and our self-respect. Because if we've told ourselves that we're going to do something or stop doing something, and we continue to do it, then that actually creates a level of distrust and disrespect for ourselves.
Mm.
Then the shame overpowers us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And we're in this like loop of
Mm-hmm,
shame and guilt
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
fear, right? I'm
mm-hmm,
afraid who I'll be seen.
mm-hmm.
And we just kind of like are on this hamster wheel, I see, of
Yeah.
just, and then every once in a while there's the anger outbursts, I think, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
all these emotions build up, build up, build up, and have these like all volcanic eruptions, call them the
Right.
binge weekends
Right.
or the things.
Mm.
And I see this a lot. And and so I kind of want to go into that. First of all, how do we, there's a lot of talk about how to heal the shame and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's
Mm-hmm.
really I think the first step of what I'm hearing is, hey, you guys, were not alone. It's
Mm-hmm.
part of, it's in the collective humanity. But the thing is, like, once we feel it, let's move that. I'm curious how can people begin to move that? I know there's a difference in my world when I was thinking about shame versus conviction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, like, how do we begin to, first of all, realize, like, we don't have to hide. We're not alone. Like, I know that
Yeah.
sounds kind of like, here, oh, that's
Yeah.
easy for you to say because you're not the one hiding. But at some level, we all are, we all
Yeah.
do, until we
Yeah.
decide to be totally naked and
Yeah.
exposed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how does someone begin to move through that journey, or like start to move the needle out of it? And then I want to actually break down some of the more practical things of the biology
Mm-hmm.
versus the
Mm-hmm.
mental and the spiritual. But How do we
Sure.
begin to move out of that dark place? Do we really need a crisis?
No, we don't. But that tends to be what ends up happening because we don't have a dream bigger than our concerns and our fears.
Mm.
The really the quickest way and the most practical way is that we have to stop doing the things that are causing us to feel shameful of ourselves. So if somebody is dealing with a drug addiction or a substance addiction, a food addiction, sex addiction, whatever it is, you are not going to be able to address the emotion if you don't change the behavior, because the emotion is a feedback response of the behavior itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it ultimately comes down to behavior change.
Action.
Yeah,
It really is
yeah.
action first. It's the body first, not the mind or the spirit first, is what you're
No,
saying.
those are just response
Mm-hmm.
mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So your internal state is actually a response to your behavior. And so you can't wait to feel better. You have to do something in order to feel better.
You got to interrupt the pattern.
That's right. You got to do a pattern interrupt. And that means if you don't feel like doing it, you have to do it anyways. Or you have to do something to get yourself into a state that where you feel better, you feel like you have more energy to do the thing. But this is what a lot of people don't want to hear, and
They don't want to
especially
hear it.
in the personal development world, where a lot of people they're saying that you need to be in the right mindset or the emotional set, but that
Yeah,
doesn't really work.
I
Now,
agree.
granted, there's things that you can do to get yourself in a better mental state, but that's my point. You have to do the things that are either going to get you there, or stop doing the things that are causing you to be in a downward spiral.
Yeah. Action, 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 action. We're in these physical bodies on this physical planet. I think a lot of the spiritual community too, whether, I come from like a deep Christian, Catholic, whatever. I've gone through all that. And then I went into a whole spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
non-religious, big, deep
Mm-hmm.
plant medicine, all that. And
Mm-hmm.
there's the wide range and I love it. But I see a lot of spiritual, really ungrounded people who are not
Yes.
connected in their bodies. So then
Yes.
when it comes down to it, they're sort of floating around but not anchored, and then we have the people who are so in the flesh that
Yes.
have no connection. So it's like, it sounds amazing, and I totally hear what you're saying. How do we interrupt that pattern? Where does that strength come from? Where does the clarity come from?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does
Mm-hmm.
somebody begin to access that? Because again, I hear that from
Mm-hmm.
the mindset is everything, willpower for, like, you just, it's a recipe for failure.
Yeah, totally.
That's a recipe for failure for
Yep.
sure. How do we train people? How do you train people to begin to pattern interrupt when they wake up already with their body craving a glass of wine, or, waking up at 5 a.m. and having this, you know, the shakes, or, I'm going extreme here, but I
Yeah,
mean,
that I
people are
mean
like that
that
with
yeah.
caffeine, right? You wake up with a
Well,
migraine or whatever it is.
Well, that's those are unique situations, and somebody that has those kind of issues needs to work with somebody that can actually guide them through a therapeutic cleansing and detox process. Like, I don't advise someone that's doing like drug rehabilitation or has a physiological convulsion reaction, especially if someone's been an alcoholic for many years and they can't just get off alcohol right away. They need to actually work with
We know.
a doctor or a qualified therapist of some sort to help them slowly detox, because their liver can't process it. It's adapted and become dependent on the alcohol or whatever the substance is. So let's just take that context there too. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that you need to cold turkey and white knuckle this by yourself. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is that you need to start getting a sober outlook on the situation that you're dealing with right now. You need to kind of map it out a little bit, and really, so start with this. Start with just writing out, what are the challenges that you're dealing with? What are the struggles and challenges that are happening in your life? If it's
Mm-hmm.
addiction, then really get honest with yourself. What are the things that you're addicted to? And write it out, look at it. That's step one. That's step one. So take it out of the closet, put it out in the open. And then step two is, okay, what are some of the things that I've been putting off that I want to start engaging with? Is it developing a consistent fitness routine? Is it eating better? Is it having a better sleep schedule? Is it focusing more time on your family, your relationships? These kind of things. Is it spending more time in nature? Is it learning to play an instrument? Is it, whatever it is? These it's this simple formula. The first thing that you have to do first is you have to take the shadow out of the closet and put it into the light. So you may have a list of like, okay, there's all these things I want to do, and but there's something in the way. There's a reason why you're not doing it.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. It's not mystical. It's not a mystery there, but there is an energetic block to between who you are now and what it is that you want your life to be. And so you have to call that out in the beginning, and then yeah, make that list of the things that you really want to engage with that are going to better your life. It doesn't in very simple things like 5, 6, 7 things that are simple, easy to access, because again, an addiction is defined as something that produces a significant amount of dopamine in the brain upon using it, and also that is easily accessible. So, in order to reroute an addictive pattern, you have to transfer over to something that stimulates dopamine in the brain, but not right away, but in a more of a delayed sense, because that's a whole other thing to talk about, is like how dopamine works and how to develop a healthy relationship with dopamine. And also something that's easily accessible, not something that's way over there, something that you can easily access just as quickly as you can the thing that you're trying to move away from, right? So in other words, in order to heal an addictive tendency, just talking about the external mechanism, the coping mechanism itself, you have to replace it with something. You can't just try to cold turkey something without a light. You can't just stop doing something without starting to do something else. So essentially what I'm saying is like the key to transformation, the key to healing, the key to overcoming addiction is not mindset. It's not willpower. It's not spiritual strength. Although all those things are, I'm a yes to all that. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just getting really practical here. It's actually changing and redirecting your energy. Yeah. So if all your energy is going towards something, that means that you have a lot of energy for something. So it's just redirecting the energy into something else. And it's going to be uncomfortable in the beginning because you're not getting as much of a dopamine dump as you would from the easily accessible activities that are giving you a short-term pleasure, but a long-term pain.
And so, that's. Oh, sorry. Did you?
Well, I was just gonna finish that thought on the whole thing that's happening with addiction is that you're chasing pleasure to avoid pain. Yeah. And so what you have to understand is that it's just a simple switch from immediate gratification to delayed gratification. Like the brain of a child is always about immediate gratification. It wants its toy right now. It wants its candy right now. And if I don't get it, I'm going to throw a temper tantrum. That's kind of how the addicted brain develops its pattern. It starts throwing these chemical triggered temper tantrums, and we get all agitated, and our body gets all worked up and triggered. So, and I do want to mention this at some point in the talk, is about self-regulation practices.
Yeah, I want to go into that in a second. So
and so
go there. Yeah, but
and the adult brain is about delayed gratification. So if you learn to delay gratification in the moment, you might feel temporary pain or discomfort, but you'll actually develop the discipline and the willpower that will pay off in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's exactly what I was going to ask you about. You kind of obviously started to go there because that was, and I love what you're saying because to the people listening, it's like we think it has to be this huge overhaul. Like it's
Right.
so massive. It's like we've created this mountain. It's the size of Everest, and it just,
Mm-hmm.
it feels insurmountable. It's like, how much strength do I need to climb that thing or to tunnel my way through it?
Yes.
And what I'm hearing you say, and is like we're really talking about retraining. We're just retraining our
Mm-hmm.
physical
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
body in these micro decisions, micro
Yes.
shifts. And I want to really double down and say that because it's not the macro, it's the micro, moment by moment, second by
Mm-hmm.
second.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, if I'm picking something up, is this actually what I want to pick up right now? Is this
Mm-hmm.
the thing that it's being microscopic, but also what's good about this is it only is a split second decision. The minute you shift,
Yeah.
it automatically creates
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
natural ripple effect, right? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
just that one moment, that 1 second. I think like as we move into like what are the ways that we can begin to, you know, regulate. I think one of the things that I talked about is having just a, I don't know whether it's a mantra. I like asking questions. I think there's really the power of asking ourselves questions in that moment that are really powerful that get us to put the thing down or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I want to ask you
Mm-hmm.
if you have some questions around that, but also I want to go back to what you were saying about oh gosh, you said so many good things. I was like, oh, I want to get in there, but filling your life up, right? You
Mm-hmm.
said it's not about going cold turkey or taking this out. And I saw this a lot in the health world. People coming, signing up for these 30-day things. I'm going to eliminate everything from my life. And I think that's what makes it so fucking hard. It's like you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to remove instead of
Mm-hmm.
saying, how do I add in? You said, what are the things that I've been putting off that I want to engage in? What is one thing that I can add in to kind of crowd out,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
begin to crowd
Mm-hmm.
out the other things? So I wanted to kind of just circle back to those things that you were saying. We're talking about microscopic add ins
Mm-hmm.
that add flavor back in that actually gives us health and healing. And another thing that you talked a lot about was connection. A lot of those things is like reconnecting to the things that you loved and not doing it alone, and right, like just connection is such a huge piece of that too, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like do not try to do this alone, like we're
Yes.
humans. So let's talk about some of those self-regulation practice. Or I also wanted to ask you, like, I want you to break down the biology for a minute, or the
Mm-hmm.
physiology of how these addictive tendencies work, so that we realize I am not the thing. It's just this interaction that happens. And also from the physical, the mental, and the, emotional, spiritual, there's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
there's three different layers there. And if we
Mm-hmm.
can separate ourselves from it and go understand what's happening at each one of these levels, we can begin to maybe pull ourselves back a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
starting with you know, the physiological, obviously we talked a lot about that, but I want to dive into that a little bit more. What happens in our biology? Like you've talked a little bit about the
Yeah.
dopamine dumps, but like just to give some clarity.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of parts of this that we could talk about, but I think I'll leave it kind of at the level of the brain for now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a number of different things happening, and it really does all come down to dopamine. Um, so your ability to understand what dopamine is and what it does is going to be a game changer. So dopamine, there's a lot of things around dopamine, but simply put, dopamine is, it's not really the pleasure molecule as people think of it as. It is triggered in the pleasure reward centers of the brain, because in the brain, pleasure is, it's kind of like it's like a milestone or a progress marker that signals some sort of reward as a way to motivate you to move forward towards something. So what dopamine actually is it's a motivational force. So dopamine controls the motivational neural networks of the brain, and it determines what you're motivated by and what you're not motivated by. So for example, if you've trained your brain to be motivated by short-term gratifying validating behaviors, which is what basically neurologically is what happens in the case of an addiction, then your dopamine system is going to be wired for short-term experiences. And that's why it's going to be very difficult for you to think long term if your brain's been wired for short-term gratification. So if you feel lazy or tired or exhausted when you think about long-term goals and you can't think past the moment, what that means is that your dopamine system needs to be rerouted. It doesn't mean that you're lazy or anything like that. It just means that your brain is actually exhausted and your dopamine system um, may be fatigued, and it just simply is not trained in a way to allow you to think long term. So that's why we have to develop a certain type of patience about us, and we have to start delaying gratification in the moment, which is the only way to really overcome an addiction or a quote unquote negative habit anyways. So
Mm-hmm.
so dopamine essentially is stimulated in the brain in the anticipation of a future event.
I love that. And when you talked about that just for a second, is these are also the people that are struggling with vision or a dream in
Hmm.
their life.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah,
mean,
that's right.
right? We ask people as transformational leaders, like, what do you want? What do you desire? And how many people can't answer that question? So for the people right now who are struggling with a clear vision
Hmm.
or just getting
Hmm.
clarity or that what is my dream, and they think there's something wrong with them, it could actually be this simple.
That's right. Yeah, you need to do a dopamine reset process. I mean, the process itself is the most powerful thing I've ever really taken people through, aside from like different types of cleansing and detoxing processes. But this is very different in a way because it actually recodifies the brain signals that determine not only what you're motivated by, how much motivation you have, your vision, your focus, your willpower, but also it influences the lenses in which you interpret reality.
Woo!
So,
That's a
and
big one.
yeah, so this is huge, and this is what people don't really understand quite yet. So dopamine has a lot to do with your ego identity, which is a huge thing with addiction, and we talked about identity before. Dopamine is one of the controllers of your egoic drives and your personal identification. Um
Mm.
and that's a huge thing because the dopamine reset's actually an ego reset, and you don't really know that until you're going through it, and then you realize how attached your quote unquote ego, which is just really a software construct, your personality construct, how attached it is to these external substances or the drugification of social media and your digital devices. You realize how wrapped up your identity is in these things when you go through this process. And but it is really the pathway towards freedom and salvation for you as a human being. And then you start to go through an ego reset.
Yeah.
So it changes your brainwave state, it changes your neurochemical kind of cocktail, your serotonin dopamine balance. And here's another interesting thing too with dopamine. Dopamine controls your time perception. So your perception of time is largely influenced by dopamine. So for example,
I did
it,
not know this. I did never hear this
yeah,
before.
yeah. So most people don't. Most is not really talked about very much.
Mm-hmm.
So
Makes sense.
when you have low dopamine production, or the dopamine receptors have been blunted from too much dopamine activity, you tend to be more in the past reference. So like
Mm.
depression, for example, is like being too much in the past.
Yes.
Now people in the psychiatry or psychology world will try to use a lot of different modalities to get people out of the past reference,
Yeah.
which is great. But the problem is, unless you deal with the dopamine system itself, you're not going to be able to effectively do that long term, because that is largely the issue, chemically speaking, is that when you have low dopamine, you're going to have more of a depressive state, and
Mm.
you're going to be more in the past. If your dopamine is higher, you're going to be more future orientated, because again, dopamine has a lot to do with motivation towards the future. So it makes sense that if your dopamine is low, you're going to have lack of motivation. So you're going to be backpedaling psychologically. If you have higher dopamine, you're going to be more forward moving. But if somebody's dopamine's too high and it's not regulated enough, they're too much in the future and they can't. And so there's more anxiety, there's more angst, they can't sit still. And that's true if you're drinking a lot of coffee or doing drugs or whatever too much. You're too stimulated, you're going to drive up the cortisol and you won't be able to sit still and be in the present moment. And it's like, people like this, they're always thinking about the next thing, the next thing, the next thing.
I work with a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, the next thing is a dopamine rabbit hole.
Yeah. I love how you broke that down. I mean, I also am thinking of this dynamic where you have even couples or, one person that's like in the slump or, I mean, this is the dynamic I'm seeing a lot. It's like depression, a lot of stored emotions, a lot of things numbed out, right? Just kind of there. And then you've got the other person who's like, crazy or whatever, right? And they're like, oh, we can't get along and we have all these issues in our relationship, and they're blaming the other person and feeling like failures. And it's like, I mean, I wanted to bring this up because I do a lot of work in this area of relationships too, and I think like this is also something we've got to look at inside of our relationships and with our children. These kids, I mean, oh my gosh, I feel like all the kids need dopamine resets. Like that should just be part of the protocol for like new world, not new world education, but the new systems that we're implementing now. Like people, it's time that we begin to, because I love that you broke that down and said too high, too much stimulation in the future, anxiety, this panicking and inability to sleep, inability to whatever. So this person needs to reduce stimulation and retrain that. And the other person that has gotten, it's the same kind of thing though, right? But it's kind of like insulin that's no longer working in a way. Now they've trained that dopamine to not kick in. So now they've actually essentially kind of burned it out in a way.
They burned, the dopamine receptors in the brain get blunted, they get burnt out. And so what ends up happening is that those people are not able to feel as much. And so they either need some sort of stimulation in order to feel something, and they're not able to feel pleasure and sensation from normal experiences in life, which explains kind of like the addiction cycle of needing substances or caffeine or whatever it may be in order to feel what they're not able to feel, because their system is burnt out. So they have to go through, both parties have to essentially go through the same process, but it might look slightly different, but essentially the reset process with a nutritional protocol, the right type of dietary approach that's going to work for them, self-regulation practices like breath work, meditation, cold water therapy, infrared saunas, kind of cold and hot therapies are really helpful. Regulating their sleep cycles is going to be key and critical. Taking significant time away from digital devices, social media, getting into nature every single day, like, really revamping their entire lifestyle is what's going to need to happen, and building that piece by piece into their life, because we've normalized to these kind of like chronic fatigue and illness and disease and immobility conditions of all kinds. Like it's become normalized in our culture, which is why we have the pharmaceutical industry to basically medicate everybody even further. And so people feel like it's normal. They don't realize that when their dopamine system is that low, it's actually a severe issue. Like what we're dealing with right now, even just with children and then pornography and all these different things, like this is a serious issue that we're dealing with. And and it's gonna, and the good news is that it can actually be remedied really quickly, like in a 30-day period, with the right support, the right guidance, in a full commitment from the person to go through the process. But that's the problem, is most people don't want to go through a 30-day process. that could actually be relatively seamless. Um, but it's just like people are in such resistance to going through it because they don't want to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I want to go into that in a sec here because making the unknown your friend. But I want to start. I do want to circle, but I love that you gave those self-regulating practices. And obviously, these things are not hard. People like this stuff is on YouTube. You can YouTube these self-regulating practices, and it's really it is about putting them into where they just become part of your life and creating a whole different lifestyle, which is really what the human design is for,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we think back
Mm-hmm.
to the design of us in the garden or whatever, I really believe that's what we are. Gardeners are just here to kind of
Mm-hmm.
be and play.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to double tap on that because I know a lot of my listeners too are struggling in their relationship and sex drive or imbalances of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I really just wanted to go back and take a moment to breathe into that there's sometimes we make these things so massive and they're canyons between us, but like what if it's something as like to ignite the passion or the desire, the flame of desire to actually want to be intimate
Mm-hmm.
again or want
Mm-hmm.
to have some sort of, you've got one person with a crazy sex drive or one person without, or
Mm-hmm.
one
Mm-hmm.
person unable to
Mm-hmm.
tap in and feel. Like what I heard you say was like, wow, can you just imagine just by we're fixing the cocktail inside of our
Mm-hmm.
bodies so that things
Mm-hmm.
start, our bodies are designed
Yeah.
to have desire and pat, like all of the
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Like we have
Mm-hmm.
so many sensors, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
design of the human body is such a beautiful thing. So I think like for those people listening, going back and re-listening to what you just said there is like, I can turn my body back on
Mm-hmm.
in a right way because we have this dysfunctional idea of what being turned on means.
Right.
This really distorted, dysfunctional relationship with turn on
Mm.
and turn off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people will repress themselves because of past trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll close themselves off, or they'll unconsciously put on extra weight to not appear attractive, or and this is like a lot of unconscious trauma response behavior. Um, and so that's another aspect of the shame that shows up and how it manifests itself, and how we protect ourselves because ultimately we don't feel safe. And
Yeah,
so
and I
that's
really.
yeah, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's where a lot of this is rooted into emotionally, is not feeling safe to be fully in our body. So we have to find something to check out of our body or to put on extra layers around our body. And that's the whole thing with addiction, is that you're stripping those layers off of you, those protective mechanisms, the armor, um, the coping mechanisms. You have to strip that stuff off of you to really become naked to yourself, and that's really where the power is.
So
um
much breathing required. So much breathing required with
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
beautiful.
totally, which is why you have to learn how to regulate yourself with breath. Like breath work is essential.
I hope you guys hear it. It sounds so easy, right? I just remember all those years in the gym, and the
Mm-hmm.
first thing we do is teach people to breathe, and they're like, "I know how to breathe." I'm like, "Honey, you do not know how to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Your breathing is shallow. Your traps are
Mm-hmm.
locked up. You're rigid. You're tense. You're not able to take a full breath and just
Mm-hmm.
pause, right?" And so as
Mm-hmm.
we go through these contractions, I was listening to your podcast with Yvonne, which was awesome. By the way, I'm going to put that link in the show notes. The emergencies before the emergence, but we go through these
Mm-hmm.
contractions with any rebirth or change. You guys were talking about that, right? And as we're feeling these emergencies or contractions or a discomfort, is like that's the training. We got to train
Mm-hmm.
ourselves in those
Mm-hmm.
moments. And I think being in a community and also doing the work on our internally ourselves, but also in community with other people who are in these practices is so essential because there is a
Mm-hmm.
massive difference between going alone and going together
Yes.
into the great unknown. So let's and really what you just said there is, why do we do it? We want to feel safe. We're either
Mm-hmm.
escaping a sense of
Mm-hmm.
I'm uncomfortable right now, I want this illusion of being numbed out and just get away from this discomfort. But really the mastery is from becoming a master of living in like the unknown is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
hearing, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
love to
Mm-hmm.
play in that space, but like it is training to get yourself to a place where this is the new normal
Mm-hmm.
instead of.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we begin to normalize living more in that space of being safe in the unknown territory and the unknown, because really isn't that all that life is? It's everything's unknown. We can't
Yeah.
really, it's all an illusion. We can't control any of it. But how do we begin to, and I know we're talking about it and it kind of comes back to a lot of similar things, but is that really what we're talking about here? Figure out who you are, get
Hmm.
comfortable in the unknown.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. And it's a continual process. Um, yeah, there's really no like, there's no roadmap for it. It's just life.
It's
It's
life.
just getting acquainted with how life really is. And so that's another thing that people have to deal with is their own issues of control. So if somebody feels very controlling or they have to have everything worked out and planned out, it's like, that's not going to work. Like that's going to end up falling apart, or you're going to fall apart because you're gripping too hard. And so there has to be an easing off of trying to grip onto life and squeeze everything or just have control of everything. This is something that a lot of women have to deal with too, because they've leaned far too much into their masculine kind of tendencies, and that's not going to work if you want to be in a relationship with like an integrated man.
Yeah.
For example, or at some point you go through the career years, and then you get into your 40s and you realize, wait a minute, I actually want to be a mother and I want to be a wife, and this isn't what I thought it was, and this isn't as actually as important to me as I thought it was. And then that's kind of a rude awakening, right? So, and then men, we have our own issues that we have to work through in that case too. Like, um so ultimately, and that's another thing with addiction too, is that a lot of it is rooted in some form of needing to control our experience or to change our state, because we don't like the way that things are in this moment. We don't like the way things are in our life. We don't like the way that we feel in our body about ourselves, other people, external environment. So we have to change all of that in order to feel differently. um so it's kind of it's an interesting quandary.
It is. It is, isn't it?
Hmm.
I think like for me the greatest teachers for sure have been being in nature. I'm curious what you, I mean, I know we layer all these things and you stack all these things, but for sure when, and I, double down, triple down on what you said about being too far in our masculine, really our wounded feminine that says I have to protect myself,
Hmm.
I have to provide for
Hmm.
myself, I
Hmm.
can't trust
Hmm.
you, all of those things.
Hmm.
So we become rigid and hard and closed off and really exhausted. And I, that was definitely my journey, and a huge piece of that for me was definitely coming back to nature. You talked about earlier,
Yeah.
and you guys were talking about really simple things like breath work and being in nature, and it's like, yeah, whatever, give me something else, like a pill seems
Hmm.
easier. But when we look at how nature works and walking barefoot on the grass, or I love to do trail hikes, just be barefoot and be in there and just changing the pace and looking at how nature works. It's been so, I mean, you talk about regulating your nervous system and self regulating practices. It's such beautiful training, and it's actually not complicated. So,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
huge piece of this is also just, as we're talking about self regulating practices, it's unplugging ourselves basically from this synthetic
Hmm.
slave
Hmm.
based system that where everything is either artificial or moving at a pace that's not natural. I mean, talk about that for 1 second, like unplugging from this really unnatural sort of pace that I think is really working against our bodies, and how like essential it is to get back to that organic. I mean, I think, I don't know. What are your thoughts? I think I know your thoughts on that, but I'd love to
Yeah.
like really get this into people to understand the effect and the
Hmm.
impact of that.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the addiction compulsions are around the need to slow down. And so we're moving so fast in our life, and the days are going by so fast. And this is also part of the control mechanism, is that we have to learn how to slow down and stop doing so much so fast, because the nervous system is not equipped for the pace of life that most of us are trying to live at every single day. And if you try to outcompete with your nervous system, you're going to break down, and you're going to need to reach for the Xanax or the sleeping pills or the pharmaceutical painkillers the anti-inflammatories, or more, maybe more natural approach. You do the same equivalents in the natural supplement world, and you try to medicate that way, or you're going to be reaching for psychedelics every weekend to try to like escape your reality versus integrate it. Whatever, like they all, this is all kind of the issue that people are dealing with, and why we reach outside of ourselves for different coping strategies or escapism strategies or numbing mechanisms. So when you understand that, then you can start to understand that ultimately nothing outside of you is going to fill in the void that you feel inside of yourself, that internal disconnect that I talked about earlier. So ultimately, then the antidote is that I need connection. So the best way to connect with yourself is to disconnect from the external world for a short amount of time and go connect to nature. And I've been doing this for a long, long time. I've been recommending this for well over 12, 13 years. One of the most powerful things that you can do is connect right back to nature, with the sun, with the air, with the earth, with the water. Getting barefoot connection to the earth, just called grounding or earthing. And it's incredibly scientifically backed in terms of like its anti-inflammatory effects. And what I mean by grounding is like getting barefoot and bare skin connection to the earth, whether that's dirt, that's sand, that's grass, that's getting into a body of water like a river or an ocean. It has
Live water.
it has profound effects on your nervous system regulation, your brain cognition, your focus, your mood, all of that. And so getting an hour of nature time every day is ideal. Breathing in fresh air, getting direct sunlight on your skin every single day increases your serotonin production. So yeah, I mean that's kind of it in a nutshell. Like we need to be doing this. This is how we're designed. And so if we're constantly we're our artificial,
Biohacking our trying to
yeah, you're trying to
biohack our
biohack
nerves.
everything and supplement everything and all these doodads and get gadgets. Like those are all good, but they're all just like middlemen towards getting back to nature. Ultimately, nature is what is how we thrive. And when you start connecting more with nature, you'll start disconnecting from the external addictions themselves, because you won't need it. You won't want it. You'll find the source of where the disconnect started, and you'll fill yourself back up. So,
So true. I'm so glad you brought that up. And yes, yes, yes to all that. I mean, I can't now. I feel sick if I don't get outside and I don't get my feet on the earth and stuff
mhm,
like that. And I love what you said earlier. Is am I trying to compete with my nervous system or out compete?
mhm,
It's like
mhm.
you can't. Okay, don't even
Right,
try to
right.
like fight nature. Don't even try to fight creation. Like creation is so perfect in itself
Mm,
that if we can become students of it,
mm,
like honestly, get out there and be a student and be
mhm,
curious,
mhm.
it's a game changer. And I love that you also thank you for bringing up the health community, because there's people who are cabinets of hundreds of herbs or whatever, and
Totally.
they've got all these tinctures and herbs, or then you've got the psychedelic. We take people on retreats sometimes, but there's an addiction to that too. And
Yeah,
it's just like,
yeah.
is this just another
Mhm.
escape, or am I integrating the work? And the integration is the hardest thing for people, right? It's like, okay, I had the epiphany, we had the awareness,
Mhm.
now we
Mhm.
know what this is. Once I raise my hand and I have the awareness, I think like the integration is
Mhm.
really the work
Yeah.
of the practice of training the body, of training the nervous system. And, I think there's a lot of people, I think, that are just really I think you said it in your last podcast. I think you were talking with Yvonne, where you're like, it's like a delusion. Like we're delusional, right? Like it's like
Mhm.
I'm a high
Mhm.
functioning, whatever. I'm a high functioning
Yeah,
alcoholic,
yeah,
a
yeah.
high
Yeah,
functioning
yeah.
workaholic, and so the pain is not great enough. That
Yeah. Mhm.
so right, this kind of goes back to like, do we need a crisis, or is there a better way, right? And the,
Mm,
the
mm,
cool thing is like there is, if there's a desire, I
mm.
guess, right? And I kind
Mhm.
of want to circle
Mhm.
back to that as we begin to wrap. Is like, do I need another divorce? Do I need another
Mm,
business burning down to the ground? Do I
mhm.
need to have total disconnection from my children where nobody knows how to talk to each other in the house? Or how can we just, it's like really, it's a decision, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always a decision. It's always a simple
It's
choice.
always,
Every single thing is a choice. Nobody's a victim. We all have a choice. You may feel uh, that you are chemically influenced, and that's true enough, but that's also because of the continual decisions and choices that we've made every single day that have created the neural pathways and the chemical associations in our brain that have kind of educated our brain on how to get short-term reward and pleasure. So we have to retrain the brain and the nervous system to respond differently, like a computer, like an operating system. You have to retrain it. You have to upload new information. It's going to take a little bit of time. You have to reset and reboot the system before you can upload the new information. So you have to go through a reset process, a
mm-hmm.
cleanse and detox process. And then you have to go through skill acquisition. So you have to learn new things and you have to engage your brain, engage your body, engage yourself actively every day to neuroplastically change those neural pathways in your brain so they desire different stimulus. So nobody's a victim in terms of like what they're quote unquote addicted to. That's all trained behavior. Nobody is like genetically an alcoholic or a cigarette smoker or a pornography viewer or whatever. Like it's all trained behavior, or sugar addict or whatever. It's all trained behavior again. I mean,
Yeah, and that's
yeah,
so cool because also I think we talk a lot about generational patterns, generational wounds, curses, whatever.
yeah.
And I think like yes and, right? There that I'm like, who taught you to deal with your emotions this way, right? It's like dads or mom or whatever, and it just keeps getting passed on.
Yeah.
So when we get these ideas like, yeah, is it generate is it, like, oh, this runs in my family, alcoholism runs in my family, or whatever, obesity runs in my
Hmm.
family. I'm like, okay, what do you say to that? Is that true?
No, it means that nobody runs in your family. No,
Did
I
you?
mean, like, no, there is an epigenetic factor to this as well. So, like, scientifically, yeah, there the epigenetics of the transference of genetic
Okay.
potential does get passed on, particularly when it comes to trauma, different psychological kind of dispositions. There are the physical genetics that we receive, but the actual addictive tendencies themselves are trained behavior based on what's been modeled to us and what we've adopted. Because we can have the genetics of our grandparents who were in the depression, they were alcoholics, they had all this fear and scarcity and all these things, and two different children can grow up completely differently.
Mm-hmm.
They can take that on and model and mirror that behavior, and then another one completely goes the opposite direction and never has any of those issues. They go completely opposite of that. So what the mystery of all that is, I don't know, but it does come down to choice. Ultimately, it's all choice. We're sovereign beings. We have free will. This is a consent based reality that we're in. So it's
Mm-hmm.
ultimately what I'm consenting to with my sovereign free will that determines the outcome of my life. It determines whether I am, quote unquote, an addict or I'm a free, sovereign, liberated being. I get
Mm-hmm.
to choose that though. And this is the thing that everybody needs to understand, is that you have to decide. The word decide means to create an incision, decide. You have to cut off all options that do not correspond to the thing that you're deciding on. So if you're deciding that you are a free, sovereign being, a healthy, vibrant being, then you don't get to do anything that doesn't correspond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Amen.
that's it. And again, it takes time. It's a progressive thing. It's not all overnight, but you have to have the courage to decide what it is that you want, how you want your life to feel, and who you want to be. and you have to continue to make that choice over and over.
Yeah, it's not a one and done, right? And
No.
I love that decide equals incision. You're literally making a cut, and that's why just I like when we make a decision and we make it from our soul and our body and our bones. It's like you could feel the energetic power behind of like
Mm-hmm.
it is done. You know, it is like the subconscious getting to work on really
Mm-hmm.
figuring that out. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that,
Mm-hmm.
like circling back to earlier, it, it's not macro of the big decisions. It's also how do I begin to just micro decisions of
Yes.
things, right? Like how do
Yes.
we strengthen that muscle of just
Mm-hmm.
we can strengthen that the decision making muscle to begin to retrain ourselves because people probably listening like I don't they're the people who are like I don't know what to do, I don't know what I want, I don't know, and there's all
Mm-hmm.
this like indecision. So moving into a state of decisiveness
Mm-hmm.
by also training
Yeah,
that is part of the
indecision
work.
is the worst place to be in. It's like living in limbo land.
It is totally. It is
Mm-hmm.
totally. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to be doing your reset. As you know, I want to have you talk about that. You've already kind of been talking about the whole time, but what do you? I'm curious from a macro level, looking at where we're headed in the future collectively. What do you
Mm-hmm.
know has got to change in the way that we're looking at treating and helping people to break free from this? I mean, you've talked about it, but what do you really see like has got to shift in the way that
Mm.
we're handling this, having these discussions about it, so that we can move forward into really multiplying this ability to heal and move forward as free individuals? Because there's so much slave systems
Mm-hmm.
out there that are
Mm-hmm.
just keeping people in these chains of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
What's really required right now?
Um, I mean, it's a lot of things are required for sure. There's a lot of levels and layers of it. I mean, ultimately, I feel at this point, if we don't get a handle on our dopamine impulses, we're not going anywhere. And so, neurochemically and even metaphysically, psychologically, we're being held in place through this mechanism in the brain. And that's
Hostage.
why I've landed on this topic and this theme, because nothing's going to change if we don't learn to override these dopamine impulses that are keeping us stuck in place. And it doesn't matter what you achieve in the world, doesn't matter how much money you make, doesn't matter how even healthy you become. It doesn't matter what
How many
happens.
rabbit holes you go down and
No,
how much
no,
bitching you do on social
no,
media.
exactly. Yeah. None of it matters, because you're just going to be changing one impulse out for another, one input output. So understanding how dopamine works and really taking to heart, like doing a dopamine reset, at least just to start, and then making this part of a lifestyle, is to me the pathway towards true freedom in these physical bodies and these nervous systems. And there's a lot of things that come along with what a really amazing dopamine reset looks like, because we've been dopaminergically uh like handicapped and neurolinked into these systems our entire life,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the technological system, it's the financial system, it's the food system, it's religion, it's so drugs, alcohol, whatever. All of these things are working on that system in the brain. And so that's really our pathway towards freedom, when you learn to reroute that. And so dopamine can actually work for you, because dopamine is the most powerful motivational force in the human kind of biology. And it literally can set you free, but you have to set it free, which is kind of a paradox.
You got to train it instead of it
You That's
training
right, you
you.
have to train it. Yeah, yeah, it's a really deep rabbit hole. And I would say, like, I'd really love for people to just explore that a lot deeper,
Yeah.
because when they understand the nuances of it, it's like a huge uh light bulb moment
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah. Awareness is so empowering if you decide to act on it. But I think a lot of people, like, again, going back into this identity or the shame, it's like they don't know. If you
Yeah.
don't know, you feel helpless. If you don't know,
Yeah.
you feel like a
Well,
victim, right?
people are pretending not to know.
Yeah. Oh, that's true
Yeah,
too.
that's a whole
That's a
other
whole
thing
other
too.
show,
Like,
right?
do you really not know? Because how many times have you said you not know? How many times could you have looked it up? How many, what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
Everything is
so
available.
I think a lot of times we pretend that we don't know, because that's easier than admitting that actually I do know something. And that means I have some sort of responsibility to do something.
That's a big one. To whom much is given, much is required, right?
Right.
So that
Right.
is the thing about awareness is once your eyes are open, once you see, you can't unsee. And that is the isn't that
Mhm.
the turmoil
Mhm.
that most of us are living in is the inner wrestling of the knowing and not living in alignment with the knowing.
Mm.
So how does one what talk like dopamine reset? I want to do it. What how does somebody do that? I know you have your own protocol
Mhm.
and I'm
Mhm.
more than happy like share that, but like how does somebody start? We've already talked about like unplugging from the matrix and getting into
Yeah.
nature and all of that stuff, but kind of give us the quick, how does somebody go into that? What are you offering right now? And
Mhm.
unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it really simple. So, a dopamine reset is essentially abstaining from the patterns and behaviors, for most people, the substances that they are addicted to, or that they're getting these kind of dopamine stimulations from. For most people, that looks like either tobacco, nicotine, cannabis, alcohol, sugar, processed foods, pornography, social media, uh, video games, gambling devices, or whatever, like
Anything,
dating
anything.
websites. Yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
all this kind of stuff. Now it's modifiable.
Mm-hmm.
However, a real dopamine reset, there's a 30-day minimum is what research shows. There's a 30-day minimum to really reroute the dopamine receptor patterns. So any of these habits, like say for example, like it's like for you it's tobacco, or it's like alcohol, or it's sugar. It's like, okay, that's my thing. um, then that's the thing that we need to omit, and we need to do it for 30 days minimum,
Yeah.
because the brain needs time not only to reset the dopamine system, but the psychological attachments that we have to these things too. And it's a bit of a process to go through. I've developed a probably the most comprehensive approach to this, because it's still a relatively new
Yeah.
concept over the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
The most basic idea of a dopamine reset is that you're literally just fasting on dopamine impulses altogether. Now, you can't go
Monks,
no.
it's like a monk lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a stoic
Yeah.
type of lifestyle compared to if you're living on a hyper stimulated lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now it's all modifiable, and that's why in my program I created a PDF that is actually a lifestyle modified approach
Mm.
that makes it easy and simple for anybody to do. And there's also a supplemental protocol for each one of these things. And that's really important too, is that you have your health and your supplement approach dialed in enough so your brain can start to reboot itself without going through too much of a withdrawal process.
Yeah, get basically what you're saying is get the support in place. If you're going to go through
Yes,
something like this, make sure that your body, you not only have the emotional support from the people around you, but your body is actually supported through
exactly.
supplementation and stuff. So I know that you're going to give a PDF download for the listeners
Mm-hmm.
here. So we're going to link that in the show notes. And there's also going to be a discount on the Ultimate
Mm-hmm.
Dopamine Reset video course, which I am excited to actually do because you catch yourself like waking up going like, I want that coffee right away. Or
Mm-hmm.
you're just starting
Mm-hmm.
to, I catch myself walking into the kitchen and make another coffee. I'm like, I don't even want coffee, like
Right.
what am I doing?
Right.
You find yourself sort of like your body's going there or picking up the
Mm-hmm.
phone and you
Mm-hmm.
just checked your
Mm-hmm.
email 3 minutes ago and you're like, why did my hand just pick up that phone
Right.
again?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think, like, for me, I don't like that feeling of just not being aware and intentional about what I'm doing. And these
Mm-hmm.
things are just happening, or, you know, wanting that wine at the certain time of the day, whatever the thing is. Right. And it's just like whenever I start to feel like I am now, this thing has kind of got its grips on me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't like that. Because once you know, too, what it's like to be free,
Mm-hmm.
you guys listening, once you know what it's like to be free, you do not like slavery anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you so much for being here. The name of this show is called The Untamed Life. So I would like to know what your take on, as we wrap up, is really what does it mean to be untamed in your eyes?
to be undomesticated. So breaking out of the chains of domestication, which is also part and parcel to living an addiction-free lifestyle,
Yes.
because it is our addictions that domesticate us in this civilization, this artificial synthetic habitat that's been created for us to mimic a natural habitat. And that's part of why we have to get back into nature so we can undomesticate ourselves and get back to what's real, what's natural, and what's actually normal, and get back to our body's normal biorhythms and our normal natural state of being. We can't do that in a synthetic environment, and we certainly can't do that when we're moving through the throes of addiction, because
Mm-hmm.
addiction creates a false identity and creates a false pseudo personality that is just based on patterns and behaviors and kind of like hedonistic pleasure reward driven impulses. And that's not what we are. That's not like our highest form by any means, right?
No, it's a
um
veil.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a veil.
Mm-hmm.
It's a veil, right, to deceive us from what we really are. And so actually the path to true salvation is through overcoming and healing these addictions, which is what was revealed to me in the process of writing the book, and why I'm so passionate about the subject and talking about the dopamine reset. It's not just because it's a great idea, because I honestly do believe this is the path towards freedom. I mean, there's multiple paths and there's multiple things that need to be done along the way. I found this is the most direct approach for what we're dealing with right now, with where
Mm-hmm.
we are so in the
Mm-hmm.
technological world, and the substance abuse and the food abuse and the sex addiction, all the things. I found this is the most direct path, and the quickest path if one takes it seriously, to find salvation, quote unquote salvation. I just mean
Yeah.
freedom,
Yeah.
for themselves.
Freedom in your body, freedom in your mind. Because if
That's
your
right.
body is not free, nothing else in you is going to be
That,
free. That's for sure.
exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, you guys, I read the book. I read the book so much. I had it in the bathtub. The pages were falling out because I mean, I really have a heart for this work. You know, I work with a lot of people that have alcoholism in their family. I'm a daughter of an alcoholic. And it's funny, all those years of blaming my dad for drinking and
Mhm.
sex addiction and all of this stuff. And I just replaced it with my own addictions.
Mhm.
Let's
Mhm.
stop pointing
Mhm.
the finger at everyone else. I became addicted to athletics, which is not a bad thing, but
Yeah.
until it becomes your identity, I
Mhm.
became addicted to
Mhm.
work as an entrepreneur. I became addicted to being in relationship. You just become addicted. So we are all in these loops. And
Yeah.
so the freedom that we can get by doing this work is really game changing. It is a freedom of in your body and a peace of mind and a liberation of spirit that really,
Mhm.
like, we are not. I'm right there with you. I appreciate this conversation because I could just imagine, maybe I'm too idealistic, but you know, I imagine a world where we're all broken free and we're like massively co-creating what
Mhm.
epic new world
Mhm.
we get to create from that place. So you guys make sure I'll put the link to the book as well in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here and being in this
Mhm.
conversation. I get to
Thank
be one
you.
of Roddy's students starting tomorrow.
I'm so excited.
Okay. Final
Mhm.
thought. Final thought for my listeners. They're going off and they're embarking and they're sitting there and they're like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm
Mhm.
scared. You know, what is the clear next step for them and what do they need to know on this journey ahead?
Okay. Well, we've said quite a bit,
Yeah.
so I don't know if they need to know anything else other than what's been said. Like, I know that
Right.
you know that you can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, many have done it before you. So don't worry about the fears and the things that come up for you. Just take one step moving forward in the direction that you want to move in. And one of the next steps that you could take is going into the dopamine reset protocol. And as Christine mentioned, I have a 30-day ultimate dopamine reset program. And we do group programs periodically, quarterly. And so if you're listening to this, the one that Christine's about to do will have passed or will be
Yeah,
in the process
that's
of
true.
it. But what's really cool about this program is that it's a video course. So there's 30 videos that go deep into a lot of different topics around addiction, so much to do with dopamine, trauma, nutrition, health, lifestyle, self-regulation practices. It's really a transformational program that takes you really deep into the subject of dopamine. It also has a 30-day PDF protocol, which you will be receiving as a free gift. So if you really like that and you want to go deeper, this program will be great for you. And then for everybody that joins the program, they will continue to have the opportunity to do every upcoming group experience that we do in the future. So that's kind of a really interesting bonus that I decided to create with this, is that not only do you get the entire video course, but you're also going to be able to do every upcoming opportunity for all the group experiences as a complimentary bonus to signing up for the program. So that's really cool. And you also get $100 discount on the program for being a listener of Christine's podcast. And we'll give you all that information, I'm sure, in the show notes.
Yeah. Wow, you guys, that's awesome. I love that. I love that bonus because it's being in it and it's staying in it. So thank you so much. To me, it's a no-brainer. I'm excited to do it, and I just, man, I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours, and
Yeah.
but thank you again. Those of you listening, make sure that you grab the links in the show notes, and remember, you are not here to be numbed out, stressed out, domesticated, and tamed. You are created for so much more, and it starts by you breaking free of the chains of addiction, of slavery, and stepping into everything that God has created us to be. So thank you again for being here. Until next time, here's to loving fiercely and leading courageously. Bye for now.